If you believe in science.
Hey, didn't you guys ever see The Thing? That's based on a true story.
But I think that's in the Arctic. Or is that Antarctica?
I think it's Antarctica.
Yes.
What's The Thing?
It's a
It's a horror
documentary.
movie. It's
Oh, is
awesome.
that the title?
One of the best.
The Thing?
It's
Yes.
a documentary
okay.
starring Kurt Russell.
In fact,
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
actually two.
Both
There's like a
versions
black
are
and
great,
white
too.
one.
Welcome back to the Prince Zeus podcast. This is episode 156.
You got it.
All right.
Wow.
I'm on the roll.
Yeah,
I may
man.
have conquered that fucking problem.
Yeah.
Tonight is going to be, I think, a very fun episode because we've talked about January 6th in the past, but the gentleman up to my left with the glasses is Ben Hamilton, and
Two guys with glasses.
I know, but he's to my left. Just work with me here.
I got you.
He was there on January 6th, as was our colleague here, Mike. So we just wanted to look at it from Ben's perspective. And Ben, please forgive me. The title of the book is "Sorry Guys, We
Stormed the Capitol."
Stormed the Capitol.
Sorry, guys, we stormed the Capitol.
Oh, look at that, a little Mike Messier vibe. So he wrote the book, and we just wanted to hear what it was like from another person that's been there, and see if the two views coincide, because that's going to say a hell of a lot, or if there's differences, and that can be perspective as well. So, you know,
Sure there are. Yeah.
But Ben, please tell us the genesis of how you started, what made you decide to write the book, and where you went from there.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for asking. So everything I do connects back to what I call the Chasing History Project, which is this idea I came up with. I was a high school history teacher for a while there, which I loved. And when I was teaching my students, I taught, the basic premise that history teachers almost always teach, which is the most reliable sources are called primary source historical documents, as opposed to secondary source. Primary source documents are the ones written by people who actually saw whatever it was they're writing about. And maybe we can come back to this later, because it's an important point that is lost on our society now, which I think history class teaches better than anything else, is asking, who should I trust? If someone tells me what happens, if I have multiple sources of information, how do I measure who's trustworthy and who's not? And that's a lot of what being a history teacher is getting them to compare different historical documents. And I'd always wanted to be a writer. I was kind of a wannabe Jack Kerouac for a lot of my 20s. I had these weird, crazy adventures where I hitchhiked across America and Europe, and I wrote like a stack of books, none of which I ever published. But I had this idea, what if I go back to that? What if I go back to having adventures and writing books, but this time my sole purpose is to create primary source historical documents so that someday, 100 years from now, some bored 17-year-old who's being forced to read a book about the past will get my book, and it'll actually be fun to read. And so I created the Chasing History Project with that mission, kind of as a conversation between me and future generations. A lot of my chapters are actually written as letters, where I'm like, dear future generations, my generation sucks. I'm talking to you instead. Like 20 years from now, you'll read this and we'll get along great. So I tried to write about things that I thought were historically significant. I tried to guess where they might happen. The first one was that thing where the protesters took over about 6 blocks of Seattle. Remember that? The Chaz?
Yeah.
Chaz?
I was there for about the second half before it ended. I was in the middle of it. I escaped a gunfight. Like, I wasn't shooting, I was running, but yeah, people were shooting around me. It was pretty intense.
Wow.
And but instead of editing that book, I just had this urge. I was like, I want to write about the MAGA rallies, because my basic metric is, if the news disagrees on what happens, that's where I want to go. If I can flip to one station and they're saying, it's the end of the world, our civilization's collapsing, and I shift to another and I said, well, it was a mostly peaceful protest. I want to know the real truth. And they did that about the Seattle protests, and they were also doing that about the MAGA rallies. So I started going to like every MAGA rally. I was like a groupie. I had a van, and I just drove from city to city, seeing Trump speak like every couple of days. And I was just interviewing people, and I didn't really know where it would go. I was just trying to get a sense of that. So I have so many notes from before January 6th of what I thought the book was going to be about. But then one day when I woke up and I did like I'd been doing every day, interviewing people at the MAGA rally, they changed Congress out of the Capitol building. And so I'm like, well, this is clearly the book. So I focused my efforts on that book. So that, your question was the genesis. That's how the book came to be.
All right, cool. Now, hey Ben, maybe I misunderstood what you had just said, because did you write a book before this one? Did you write about the Chaz Experience or no?
I wrote, I did not publish. I finished the first draft. It was very different, actually. They were two dramatically different books.
Sure.
The first one of my Chaz book, I used the term chop because they'd changed the name by the time I got there.
They did. I remember.
So I wrote a book about the chop, and that just like burst out of me in like less than a week. It was just like a frenzy. I had like a first draft. But before I could finish editing it, I was like, the election is going to happen, and I'm going to lose my chance to ever write about the MAGA rallies. So I left it unfinished, and I started writing about MAGA.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Yeah. Okay.
Gotta
cool.
go back to that though. That was
it should come out in a couple of months. I'm planning ahead. This is a marketing plan. I'm plugging my next product. It's coming out in a matter of months here.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'll check that out.
Ben, did you go to Washington D.C. like in November after the election, where they had like the Stop the Steal rallies? I think there were like two of them. Okay.
Yes, I was there for those. I went to a lot of those.
Yeah.
I had this sense that there was some sort of social pressure building and it was going to explode somewhere, but I expected it to happen on election night. So like I stayed up till 4 a.m. on election night, and I thought, okay, whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen now. But then it didn't. The pressure kept building for another month or so afterwards.
Yeah. No, that's
like lancing a boil.
Sort of.
Well, it is. I mean, again, kudos for what you're doing, like for the children watching our episode. This is what
don't
we
watch our
journalism.
episode, children.
Yeah, this was back in the old days. We called this sort of thing kind of like journalism. And
what's that?
And Ben seems to have a good sense or ear or whatever, or at least he's persistent and gets himself into situations where he is able to do this, which I just find fascinating. I mean, the fact that the fact you're able to do this and like travel around and getting like firsthand accounts, and we'll get into it in a little bit, but I listened to a lot of your interviews, and I think everyone should. I mean, to me, it was incredibly profound. I mean, just getting all of the different perspectives, because like any event, especially an event that has 300,000 people, whatever number you want to use.
Yeah, that's a point of contention, isn't it?
I
talk about that in the book significantly.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking at the giant crowd and I'm like, okay, I have been in politics long enough to know that the liberals are going to claim this crowd is tiny and the conservatives are going to claim it's gigantic. How big is it really? And I'm trying to I try to imagine the areas that people are going to argue about and see if I can get a definitive answer. That's sort of
and that's the thing. They should be able to, from the sky or whatever, like give us that answer. But and I've said this in the earlier episode, and this is just anecdotal. But I mean, again, where we live, like I hate to say I like politics, but I've been down to DC many times,
Dude,
and
you
down to
love
the mall.
politics.
I'm a
I'm in
junkie,
DC almost
like,
every day. Like I go down there for stuff. Like I like it. You know, I mean, I like seeing this stuff. I like seeing people represent what they're doing. And for me personally, it was the largest crowd I had ever seen down there in my life. Like I had
That-
never been down there for anything of that size. But
I believe, didn't you
That's
explain it
anecdotal.
as like the Charlie Chaplin movie where like
yeah,
all of a sudden you turn around and there's like 300,000 people behind you?
yeah. So there's a movie called
Here, let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
Here.
sorry.
Did you hear the term "the sea of people" when you were there? Like the giant crowd. I had multiple people in the crowd describe it to me that way. It just seemed like
Sea of people.
spontaneous. The sea of people.
I mean, I don't remember that phraseology, but I mean, it was definitely a mass of people. I mean, it was a lot of humanity there for sure.
I said the same thing in my book. Like, I don't have the particular training to authoritatively say what 1 million people versus 500,000 looks like.
Yeah.
You know, a few people do, but it was the single biggest group of human beings I've ever seen anywhere.
It's
for
the
whatever
biggest
that's
group
worth.
I've been in. Put it that way.
I was trying, like I did, there's a section in the book in chapter 2 or 3 where I'm trying to guess, and I like, okay, I remember like I went to like football games, like professional stadiums as a kid, where they had like 70,000 people. If I look around, this would seem to be like 4 or 5 of those football stadiums that I can,
Mhm.
you know, like just try like back of the envelope math, like not at all anything that would be like definitively reliable. But I do question the official story. You know, that it looked like a lot.
What did they say? Like, what is the official number? I don't even know.
I don't recall, but I think like I heard numbers of like 10,000 people or something like that, and it just
Definitely not that.
it seemed like an unusually large crowd. Like I asked a taxi driver in Washington D.C. because I stuck around Washington D.C. for more than a month, all the way through the inauguration.
Wow.
And I continued to interview more people, like anyone who claimed they had seen anything. I interviewed them, I recorded them. Maybe someday that'll just turn into a whole other book, but it informed me a little bit in writing this book.
Yeah.
And like there was a guy who was a taxi driver. He said, well, you know, it was pretty big, but the BLM crowd was bigger. That could be true. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah.
But like it was a big crowd. Like there's these news reports of it that just say it was like not even like, you know, average or smaller. And like that speaks to bias to me. And before we get too far into this, do you mind if I just sort of, because people are often curious like what my political background is, do you mind if I just establish that just for the sake of
that would be great. I was going to ask.
I get asked that a lot. So first thing I will say is that if you look at my book, there are reviews saying they hate me because I'm a damn liberal, and there's reviews saying they hate me because I'm a damn conservative, and I am proud of that. That tells me I did something right.
You got people talking.
Yeah.
No, it's subjective too.
I was raised by Democrats. I very much grew up in the Democratic circles, and I was active as like a Democratic activist in, you know, when I was young and full of hope, you know, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I'm very familiar with that world of Democratic politics. At a certain point, I just kind of burnt out on them. Like they just seemed too corrupt, and I couldn't like justify giving them as much of my energy anymore. And I ended up, because, you know, I have a degree in political science. I ended up drifting into teaching social studies after I left actively working in politics. I don't identify as a Republican, but I get a little more disappointed in the Democrats every year. Like the more I watch them, I feel kind of like personally betrayed. Like I sometimes think I let the Republicans get away with too much because I never liked them. Whereas like the Democrats, like I take it personally.
Yeah, you hold people that you revere to a higher standard.
Right. But as far as like my angle from the book, I just want accuracy. I want to create an accurate historical record that might actually be useful to someone who didn't live in this time period to try and imagine what it would have been like to live in this time period. Maybe even to get some lesson out of it and avoid the mistakes we made, because there were many. So I try not to come all across as if I'm part of any team. But on the other hand, I don't claim to be neutral. My goal isn't to make sure everyone looks exactly equally good. Like, I mock people. Like, when people say and do dumb shit in the book, like, I make fun of them. I think that's important to make it fun to read. So it's my target audience is a 17-year-old kid who was like born 2 days ago, like when he grows up. I'm trying to read something that's fun for them. So that's kind of my perspective. Like, I see myself as a character in the books. Like, my job is to do something interesting that'll make the audience want to read about it, and then also they'll maybe absorb some history while they're there. So like, there's one point in the book where I'm just thinking to myself, like, I just climbed down the side of the Capitol building to escape police tear gas.
I just read that.
But by inserting that detail, hopefully in the middle of the history lesson, people will maybe want to read it.
Yeah.
That sounds great. That's terrific, man.
Like I said, it's a service. I mean, this is it's sad that there's not more people doing it, and I'm glad you are. Because
there are
again,
a fair bit.
There are some, but not enough. I mean, not in the mainstream media.
See, they're not
corporate media.
They're not plugged into the microphone. They're not branched out. But it was interesting to me. At both of the events covered in those two books, is the CHOP protests and the MAGA rallies, I would bump into a lot of independent journalists, people who just, there was a few people, one guy in particular I had a few adventures with, like I wrote some chapters about him, but they got cut out. But like, he was independently wealthy. He was like the richest guy in a small town. He owned 3 businesses. So like, he'd managed to work his way up to money. So he just kind of like hired a camera crew and put everything up on YouTube and spent his time researching things. And he was a pretty cool guy. And there's a fair number of people out there. You just have to look for them. They're not going to be on like the channels on TV.
Yeah, do some work.
Yeah. Find them. You can find them. It's not all gone.
Yeah, that is one of the things that we find a bit depressing on our show, is that journalism is just it's all clickbait and all this other stuff. There's no like real journalists out there. I mean, for me, like, for what it's worth, I think Rogan is kind of like setting a standard for how you report what's going out there.
Okay. I love Rogan. But
yeah,
Rogan is great because he talks to real journalists. He's not a journalist.
Yeah, he's not a
Matt
journalist.
Taibbi is a journalist.
Yeah, right. But
Greenwald is a journalist.
Lack of a better term, he does.
He eliminates.
He's bringing them on, so
he platforms them.
Guilty by association. Yeah. I think the guy's brilliant. I'd vote for him for president, but that's besides the point.
It is fun listening to him think his way through a problem. Like I listen to Rogan all the time, and I love the way he'll admit he doesn't know something, but then continue talking about it and ask questions and see if he can figure his way through it. See if he can figure it out. That's what people should do.
It's an interesting process to watch when he's on. When I pretty much watch every episode except for the MME ones, because I just don't give a shit about that. But
well, I think again with Rogan and I mean, just podcasts in general. I mean, conversation, even, way back before podcasts, we had this thing called conversation. Not having to be 1,000% perfectly correct about every little detail. I mean, you have to give people, if you're having a conversation with someone, you got to give them some rope. Like, you can't be like, no, that was 1947, not 1946. Like, I mean, so, Rogan, he doesn't, but he'll say when he's, on a shaky limb, from what he knows. But anyway, I mean, I appreciate that. I'm not, again, like we were talking before the show, we try to look at things, the longer arc, right? The longer arc of the story. What's the bigger picture of things? And you don't necessarily have to noodle down and have, the minute detail figured out to get the bigger picture all the time.
I'm gonna push back on that, because that's actually, I always try to look for an excuse to read my book. Do you mind if I try to quote something here?
I like this guy. Yeah.
All right. Actually, talk amongst yourselves. I'll see if I can find this thing that
we're here for you, man.
You're so good.
Well, one
Hold on.
question I have, Ben. I do have a question.
Oh, I got it. I got it.
Okay.
I found the thing I was looking for about the
Okay.
big picture and the small picture.
Yeah.
So this is actually this is a great follow-up because you spent a lot of time talking about this on your other January 6th episode, which as I mentioned, I watched in preparation for this, about the Brian Snik, the police officer who died of a stroke, and a lot of people tried to somehow say the crowd murdered him, which wasn't true. They committed crimes,
Which is still
but they
horrible.
didn't murder him. Right.
Yeah.
But all right, so it says as of this writing, the most recent reporting is saying the officer may have died of a reaction to bear pepper spray. I'm sure many blue-haired audience members in 2021 will complain I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. After all, he still died. Something bad happened. It was Trump supporters' fault. Who cares about the details? If people in my time actually read this, they would have long since worked themselves up to a righteous fury and gone off to the internet to call for my head because I was, quote, defending the insurrectionists. But that's not the point. Accuracy matters. Getting the details right matters. It's the only way we'll ever be able to put the pieces together and make accurate guesses about what pieces we're missing. We'll never have any chance to see the big picture if the small picture has been embellished to better fit a narrative that someone is trying to push.
Wow.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It doesn't, it's a horrible thing.
Fit pretty
what
well,
happened to him.
That's pretty good, yeah.
No, but it doesn't. If people are going to look at something as immense as what happened on January the 6th, 2021, and noodle it down to whether Snik died of bear spray, like I think they're whistling past the graveyard. They're missing the forest for the trees. Like they're focusing on something that is, it's like, okay, whatever, man, you win. But meanwhile, there's all this other stuff going on, right? I mean, it's like, it's important, and I agree with you 100%, because it's up to the reader, it's up to the researcher, it's up to that 17-year-old in the future to make their own decision on things. What we owe people, what the media owes us, is just the facts, and let us put it together.
Not all this bullshit that it's like they're chumming the water.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
and again, the danger of this, and we've gotten into this, it's like, if you don't, like, here's a dangerous thing. I do support Trump, and I have a lot of issues with him. And because I don't trust the corporate media, it's like, that's horrible. Because what if Trump does something like, makes a deal with the Chinese for $10 million and MSNBC gets a scoop and they report it, and I'm like, screw those guys. It's all just fake news. Like, no one wins in this situation. If people like knee-jerk don't trust the press, that is horrible. That is a horrible situation.
Absolutely. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is, I think, an issue of our time that is lost in the shuffle, because Lord knows there's dramatic and exciting things happening, but that, like, nobody knows which sources of information to trust. People don't even have that set up. At the risk of overdoing a bit, do you mind if I keep reading? I actually think it's relevant to what you just said there.
Knock yourself out, man.
Yeah.
All right, so picking up at the very next sentence, on top of that, if literally everyone in the media got this wrong, saying the cause of death was being beaten and there was no evidence of blunt trauma, source noted, should we really trust them the second time when they come around and say it was bear spray? Are these credible people?
No.
Aside from wearing snappy, well-tailored suits, have they given us any reason to trust them to do even minimal fact-checking? Note, when I was late in the process of editing this book, official reports finally came out admitting he had died of 2 strokes the day after the event. They were probably related to the stresses of the previous day, but he still died of natural causes. Source noted, 130. The media tried twice to push the false narrative that the MAGA crowd directly murdered a police officer, and both times they failed to get the facts straight. Again, if you really need me to say this, the crowd was guilty of many crimes. They weren't somehow good just because they were falsely accused of this, but nonetheless, the really catchy narrative of murder that the media doggedly attached to them for months was a lie. The bottom line is this. When your society forces members of Congress to walk past a dead body on display in the center of the Capitol, but nobody bothers to call the guy's family and ask what killed him, it speaks to a deeper issue. It speaks to a culture where narratives are pushed so enthusiastically that accuracy is a distant afterthought. These are not people I trust to leave accurate history lessons for future generations. That's why I decided to do it myself.
Yeah.
Good for you, man.
Mhm.
Good for
I
you.
mean, and again, it's like the whole thing of like, okay, the truth. I mean, when I was listening, and again, I didn't read your book yet, Ben, but I listened to a lot of the audio on your site, and it's like I'm not even thinking
the
about
raw interviews I conducted the day of. Oh,
yes,
yeah, that's great.
yes, and I'm
I
like,
should mention that actually.
yeah,
Do you mind if I explain? On my website, I posted the complete interviews of everything I used in the book. So every now and then, just for the purposes of length, like I had to make a few cuts, but the full interviews are available for the public on the website, so anyone can get all the full information themselves.
and hearing it, like I said, it's like, to me, it's not even, I mean, truth, no truth, whatever, put that over here. You're interviewing people, and the one thing that all of those people had in common to me is they seem sincere. Like they believe what they're saying. Like you are getting a heartfelt, in the moment. They're not, I don't think they're putting you on. I don't think they're puffing up their story. I don't think they're trying to deceive you. I think they're being
I
very
agree.
honest. And to have that many different perspectives, I mean, there's people that are like, I will die here today, right? And then there's people that are like,
that's telling.
I don't know
wanna
what
die here
happened.
today.
I was going to get an ice cream cone, and all of a sudden, I mean, I'm saying it is,
Right.
to me, that is part of the story. It
is.
There's so many different perspectives of what went down that day, because people brought a lot with them to that
They
day.
did.
People came from all 50 states, from all around, and they had grievances. They were just like, rubberneckers looking for a disaster. They were whatever, and everything in between. And that's why, like I said, I was going to listen just to a few to prep, and I ended up, I mean, I spent like a good hour and 20 minutes just going through everything. I thought it was
very kind.
fascinating. I thought it was fascinating.
I agree, but thanks. Do you mind if I give us a little structure here? Like I would love, and I mentioned this before we talked.
Structure.
I would love to.
Whoa.
I'm a teacher. I gotta
structure.
put structure on everything.
That's right.
You have
Is
to have a
structure okay?
combination of order and chaos. That'll give you the greatest.
You got the chaos.
yin
You
and
do the
yang.
order.
Okay.
I'm both, man. I'm both. I'm a very
Okay.
chaotic individual myself. But I'd like to just describe what I think happened. Because one of my first things I want to make sure that it's clear to everyone is I believe that there are false narratives on both the right and the left that just tried to spin the events into a useful political narrative for their agendas. And so there's holes in both sides of the story, but it's not necessarily equal either. So having been on the ground, having interviewed other people who are on the ground and I tried to base my analysis mostly on that, mostly on the actual primary source witnesses. There's a little bit of research mixed in here and there, well documented. So I can run through what I think happened, big picture. It's interesting. I didn't think of this really until I got to the end of the book. Like I wrote the whole book. I wrote each interview. I analyzed each one, and then at the end, I asked myself, okay, so what really happened? And this is what I came up with.
Yeah.
I can give you that. And then you, as someone else who was also there, I'd be interested to hear if there's any points of agreement or disagreement.
100%. Yeah, roll.
Yeah. So I think it's important to understand how much tension there was in this time period. I try to imagine someone 30, 50 years from now, they wouldn't understand that like the COVID lockdown was making everyone go kind of crazy already. Like everybody had lost their jobs. They'd lost their businesses. They were angry. They weren't allowed to go out. And then suddenly the George Floyd thing happened, and we had the BLM protests all over the country, and people figured out, oh wow, we're still allowed to do that. Wasn't that odd? Like the lockdown shut down everything, but not the BLM protests. And then the MAGA protests had that same immunity. So you have these two fairly opposite groups circling around each other. So at least people who disliked each other. I wouldn't say opposite, but they were antagonistic. And they were kind of playing off each other for that whole year. Then on election night, Trump goes on TV and he announces that the election was stolen from him. To all these people who are already used to mobilizing, traveling around the country, going to different places. And that, I would argue, was maybe the single biggest thing he ever did, because maybe I'll get pushback from this, but I never saw conclusive proof that it was stolen. He claimed it was, but like he threw numbers out there, but he didn't like have like studies and sources to prove it. But we can come back to that point either way. The point is his supporters believe that. Like they trusted him. Like, of course, like he's the president of the United States. They trust him. The president of the fucking United States tells you the election was stolen. You're not going to question that. You're like, okay, it was stolen. So this was very serious to them. So on January 6th, it ends up all coming to a head because that's the day that Congress is supposed to officially certify the election. They're supposed to certify that Trump lost, even though Trump is still claiming he really won and it was stolen from him. He gets a group of people together to give a speech. I'm in the crowd. And here's what really interesting happened. He spoke too long. He does that. He doesn't want to stop. He likes the sound of his own voice too much. And so, but the people in the crowd this day kept getting messages on their phone saying, hey, we're here to protest Congress certifying the election. And Congress has started to certify the election. We were supposed to do a protest march. So they leave without him. This is left out of all the major news reports, but people started leaving. Like people around me were starting like, lead the march, lead the march. But he wouldn't shut up. He couldn't make himself stop. So they left without him. And those people walked a few blocks away from the speech to the Capitol building. And they got into some sort of scuffle with the police. The details of that are a little sketchy. Tragically, I didn't actively witness that. I stayed watching Trump. So this is based on interviews I did with other people. But the police are quickly overrun, like the crowd massively outnumbers them. Turns out later, this is sourced in my book, the police are under orders not to open fire on the crowd. So, I mean, what the hell are they going to do? You know, they fall back. They're outnumbered 1,000 to 1. And all the rest of Trump's crowd, from when he finally finished speaking, is walking towards the Capitol too. So from the perspective of the police inside the Capitol building, whose job is to defend it, it looks like there's like 1 million people walking towards them who maybe all want to break into the building. Now, turns out it was just this front layer, but it looked for a few hours like maybe the whole crowd was going to go nuts. Maybe they were going to burn down the city. Because remember, there had been 2 riots in the city of Washington, D.C. that year. Riots were very common this year. It was plausible that this group of angry people might burn down the city. Like from the perspective of the police, that was plausible. So the police fall back. They do, I think, the pretty logical thing. They focus on evacuating members of Congress out of the building, and they admit that they don't have the manpower to maintain control of the building. So the crowd, for a few hours, just has the run of the place. They're running through the building. I talk to people. They go into break rooms and put their feet up on the desk. They eat the donuts. They smoke in front of no smoking signs. You know, it's mostly stuff like that.
Yeah, Ben, I'm sorry. Just the sample chapter I got to read was the conclusion chapter where you kind of going over these points. I think you called it like a perfect storm of intersectional stupidity.
Yes, that's one of my big lines.
And it also included photographs. And so I guess my question, because you had stayed back while Trump was still talking, but my understanding of your position is that you were actually in the building as well, correct?
No. Okay, so no, so backing up a little bit in the narrative, make it a little more personal. I walked down with the march of people, interviewing different people, ironically looking for some interesting story. Like, I know in hindsight, there were people already punching police officers, but I didn't know. like I went to buy a hot dog. Like people think like the city was like under siege, and like that's not accurate. It's like I even talked to people who lived in the city like a week after who said they were terrified and they were hiding in their house because of what the TV said was going on. But I was in the middle of it, and my urge was to buy a hot dog. You know, it's like then that's where
that's democracy right there.
Right. And to be clear, there were definitely some pockets of violence. Violence happened, but it wasn't like 3 hours of total mayhem the way it's sometimes portrayed.
Okay,
So,
I know. I just wanted to clarify that you didn't actually go in because I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I'll tell you as far as I got. So I'm eating my hot dog and I hear someone say, "Sorry guys, we stormed the Capitol." And I'm like, "What?" And so like I ran towards that as quickly as I could. I got all the way up to the building, and I was tempted to go in. I still think about it sometimes. There was like a moment where like, the crowd, they got like it was almost, I could describe it like like somebody pulled a plug on a bathtub, and like the crowd was just suddenly like draining, surging into the window, like they were just circling the drain. There was a broken window, and people just started running, and like a big crowd of people, and I was swept up in the crowd. And so like I have to make a split-second decision. I'm like, at the last minute, I'm like, no, I stopped and I jumped aside, and that was as far as I went. But what I did do is I interviewed people the moment they exited. Like people would walk out and I'd be like, "What did you do while you were in there?" And I recorded that. Like he was saying earlier, I really don't think they'd had time to like come up with a lie or remember what their lawyer coached them to say.
Oh, sure.
I got people to tell me what they really did. And to me, I think even more important, why they did it, at least in their minds, what they were thinking.
Yeah.
It's the intimacy of it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I love that somebody smoked a bong in there. That's friggin' hilarious to me.
I love that they ate the break room donuts.
Yes, and they ate the break room donuts.
Taking a shit in the toilets.
I mean, listening to those people and like how some of those people, again, you had quite a variety of like upset to like I'm gonna die today, right? Like and the thing is, it's like people again, people brought their own baggage to it. I think people witnessed the same event, right? But saw different things. Like they just, and I didn't realize that at the time. And in fact, listening to your recordings, I was like, wow, that is really amazing. I mean, the thing that always struck me was the vast majority. I mean, I don't, if it's 1% of people that went in the Capitol or did stupid shit, that's probably high. I mean, from my perspective, from what I saw.
Or just mean of the crowd there?
Of the crowd between the ellipse and the Capitol.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very big crowd. Like,
it was
logistically, you could not even fit any significant portion of that crowd.
But I'm just saying, I saw people hitting windows. I saw people going in. I saw, I didn't really see people going after police, although I've seen that in footage. But I saw police going after people. A lot of tear gas and flashbangs and stuff going off.
No, I mean, that's in case that wasn't clear. That's what this picture is. Like, I took this picture. This is a flashbang going off as like their police are pushing us off of the Capitol building. That's what's behind me.
Which was kind of weird to me at the time when the flashbang started, because there was definitely a law. And so I was at the ellipse I was between the ellipse and the Washington Monument up on that hill. And what Ben's saying, that I remember that, like, he was still talking and people started leaving.
Yeah.
And personally, when I went down there, I hadn't even thought of going to the ellipse. My whole thing was, I want to stand outside the Capitol and yell. Like that's what was in my head. Like blah blah blah, And but from where Freedom Plaza was, it was like, well, Trump's going to be talking at the ellipse, so everyone kind of walked over there. But a lot of people at the ellipse were just sort of like tapping their toes. Like there were a lot of people, I think, that wanted to go to the Capitol. Like, anyway, a large group, from what I saw, broke off. I mean, he was still talking for 20 minutes afterwards, probably. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I timed it was more than an hour in total.
Yeah, in total. But I mean, personally, by the time I got down Pennsylvania Avenue and broke off there by where, like, I would say the campus of the Capitol was, there was already people on the lawn. Like that was just sort of like, oh, okay. Everyone's
Yes,
walking up here.
that's what happened to me. Like
It
I
wasn't
tried
like a big deal. And then later they're like, oh, there were fences here. And I do remember seeing some fences, but they were, I mean, that was long down, you know what I mean? But these are like landscape fences.
I know exactly what you mean. They were very flimsy. What's so funny is less than 12 hours later, they put up this big sturdy metal fence
Yes,
to replace
yeah.
the flimsy fences. And I'm like, why the fuck didn't you do that the day before?
I will
Like that's
say,
probably all you would have needed. Like they were,
Yeah,
I don't think.
yeah, 100%, dude. There was
no,
no one
Ben,
that
I
was,
also like
yeah.
the fact that in that final paragraph where that I referenced about the perfect storm, I thought you broke down nicely and impartially the different parties that were sort of at fault for what happened, including the mayor.
Yes, no one talks about that.
No one talks about that, but it's important. So I was glad you included the mayor's stupidity as part of this larger picture. Because I think that lends to your credibility too. It doesn't read like a totally anti-Trump, oh, it's all his fault kind of conclusion. So
right. It's harder than it sounds to strike the balance. I'm going to actually seek the truth, because like you very easily sound like you're on one or the other narratives people are used to hearing.
Well, especially with this kind of event, because it was all one-sided party really present, and they're the ones who busted into the Capitol. So it's easy to be partial, sort of against just them. I mean, so I thought you did a good job at least throwing the mayor in there.
Yeah.
And I obviously only read the final chapter, so I don't know what else is in the book. But I wanted to ask you this question before I forgot. Most of what I read, it's not opinion, it's this is what I'm witnessing, this is what I was told by people present. So like you're in the trenches, and all you're doing is reporting what you witnessed. But at the same time, like we talked about the Brian Snik death and your conclusion, I think rightly so, about how he died. I'm just curious, are there sort of other stories that you touch on in the book? Like, do you mention more detail about the shooting of Ashley Babbitt? Do you mention anything about Epps? And do you get into the fact that the media told us like 5 police died that day, not just Snik? Like, I just wondered, is there perspective of the stories floating around that we hear?
I did do that. So the book, what I ended up cutting it down to, like it was a grueling process, editing the mountains of notes into like one single cohesive narrative.
I can't.
But I ended up cutting it down to just that day. I just tell you everything I did from beginning to end.
Okay, that's what I wanted to find out.
I was aware of the things the national media touched on, and anytime I saw them, I tried to make sure I remembered to include my perspective if I happened to see it. Like, so there were people going around after Ashley Babbitt got shot saying there was a 14-year-old girl who was shot and killed by the police, and that was inaccurate. But that if somebody said 14-year veteran, that was Ashley Babbitt, and it turned into a 14-year-old girl. So like I interacted with that like in the moment at the time, like in the fog of war. I did bump up against that, and there were, because I knew that there would be some sort of question about instigators. That was a term that MAGA people liked. Like they'd used it before. I'd heard it at other MAGA rallies.
And which term?
Instigators. So like anyone who does anything wrong, they're an instigator, and there must be an Antifa double agent. Like I saw that so much. So like I point out in the book that day I talked to so many people who were sure that the QAnon shaman was an Antifa double agent.
Who's the QAnon shaman?
Oh, he's
the dude with the
pictures. The Q
horns.
Who I spoke to. Like it's amazing how like
I see. Okay, I know.
Smiled on me that day. I had a brief recorded conversation with him, few seconds, not really an interview.
Did he do the voice?
Well, yeah, he did have a cowboy gravelly voice. I did mention.
No, well, he that was a put on.
Before he got
put
famous,
on voice that he did.
But I was just amazed how many of the principal players I actually did manage to interact with in some
That's
way.
great.
Like incredibly. But
You're part of history,
but
man.
yes, the crowd turned on him. Like he went viral almost immediately. The image of him sitting on it was the Senate chamber,
Yeah.
with his costume on. You know, the barbarians have stormed the Capitol. Basically, it went
Yeah,
viral.
it was not a good look.
Yeah.
Yeah, but everyone was sharing it. Like I saw it when I was there, just outside the building, shortly before the phone stopped working, because they did stop at some point. So, and everybody loved him. And then they turned on him instantly. They threw him under the bus. Like once, they figured out that this was not a popular thing, that people were mad at them. Like everyone was like, okay, it was someone else's fault. It must have been someone else's fault. His fault. It must have his hit. Whereas like an hour before, like you could tell people were planning how to tell the story to their grandkids. They were so proud. And then suddenly afterwards, it was like, no, it must have been an Antifa insider. I note that change. Having said that, that doesn't mean that there weren't people inside the crowd who had some kind of agenda. I saw a couple of people, like there was a guy trying to, say, everyone, I need the men to form up and push their way into the building, like trying to like send out instructions. There was a guy who was like breaking tons of windows. Like it seemed plausible to me when I was there, like right up at the building, that all the broken windows maybe were broken by just one guy. Like he kept like going up, breaking windows, and the people around him would like pull him down, and they'd be like, no, and they'd say, you're a Fed, you're trying to make us look bad. And then he'd go back up and he'd break more windows. I don't know if that was true, but I did witness
screaming,
people
hello, Mr. Wilson.
Well, yeah, Ben, you've probably seen the video of the guy of Epps the night before on January 5th, where he says, tomorrow we're gonna storm the Capitol. And the entire crowd around Epps is going, Fed, Fed, Fed. So you can actually see videotape on that, of that being evidenced. I mean, like they were very distrustful of these possible instigators, these psyops, I guess.
And I don't know the answer to that one. Like
No, I'm saying that the video
like,
backs you up. The video backs up those attitudes.
I try to present what I saw on that as neutrally as possible. Like there are some situations where I conduct enough interviews, I witness enough things myself where I feel like, okay, I feel pretty sure I know what happened. This question on instigators, insiders, I don't.
Of course not. No, I'm saying that it must have been a prevalent mentality, as you report, that there were people that were suspicious of government interference. I mean, that
certainly there was. Although, but like I talk to a lot of people, if I talk to MAGA people, who just they want to take that and run with it. There's like an opening. I know. So I say something like that, and like, yeah, nobody did anything wrong. It was all a trick. It was all a setup.
I think it's all of it.
I watched.
It's all of it.
I interviewed a guy talking about how he punched and kicked cops. I know that happened. I talked to him. I interviewed the guy who personally claimed credit for ripping open 4 of the doors so people could get in. Like I recorded that guy. Like,
there's no doubt.
There were some bad actors in the MAGA. Now, maybe
of course,
other people instigating as well. That could.
Of course.
There was, again, perspective is everything. And Zeus texted me that day because I said something about, I was like, yeah, I'm going to go downtown, whatever, which again was not unusual. It's something I'd done before. But not until I was on the metro heading back home, and there was this young man in the car. He was probably like 20, African-American gentleman. And I'm there with some other people, and he's looking at me like, he's looking at the people that are sitting around me like we have 3 heads, because it's like some people have like Trump memorabilia, whatever, like you can tell, and we're like talking like, what the hell just happened? And he's looking at us like we just beamed in from another planet. And I was like, what's going on? And he was like, were you guys down at the Capitol? I was like, yeah. And he was like, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, oh shit, like, what's this about? And not until I got home and looked at the news. And that's when I started being like, holy shit. And then Zeus texted me something like, "Get the hell out of there," or something like that. And I was like, why is he being so dramatic? You know what I mean? Like it didn't hit me. Even though I saw some stuff, I've seen stuff before. I mean, during the summer of 2020, again, I live outside DC down Wisconsin Avenue, stores, window fronts broken, boarded up, riots, I mean, fires. I mean, that's not I mean, it's not super common, but it's not uncommon in this area.
Yeah.
But I did not understand the scale of it until that evening.
And again, that's a side effect of the very unfortunate times in which we live, in which the news media has lied to us so many times that we're not really sure what really happened in a lot of other situations, because like I understand like what you were saying about like that vibe. Like I said, I spent a while like just trying to buy a hot dog, while this was going on. And when I got up there, sometimes it felt kind of like a beach party, But on the other hand, I interviewed the people as they were leaving the building, and they told me like they were fucking tackling police. And they gave me they were also sure they knew what was happening the whole way over. And they didn't realize what they were describing didn't happen in other places. Like there's this one guy who I call him the linebacker in the book. He says, "Look, and we weren't punching and we weren't kicking. We were just playing football. We were just pushing them," which somehow that's better, I guess, in his mind. Like, you break into a nation's capital and push police. Okay. Yeah, but like then the very next guy in the book I cut to, the guy was like, "Oh, I punched people. I was punching, I was kicking," So like the one guy was 100% sure that nobody was punching and kicking. The other guy said he was punching and kicking. And the next guy, he just said, "Oh, it was completely quiet. I just went in, looked at the statues and walked back out. Didn't see anything. It's totally quiet in there." So they were clearly like
different experiences.
Right. When I sifted through all the data I collected, the image I got is that the police were just totally outnumbered. So there's certain areas where the police were maybe making a stand or trying to at least separate them from the potential members of Congress. There was a certain area where the police were just kind of improvising, because like what are you going to do? Like here's another thing to think about.
They don't plan for that.
Yeah, all these people who just pushed the police down and broke into the building, they're the same ones waving signs that say "back the blue." So like I thought about this. Has this ever happened before? Like a group of angry people push their way into a building, shove the police over, and then pick the police back up and say, "Hey, we support you," right?
There were people.
It's unusual.
I remember, I don't know if you saw this, Ben, but I remember, and it wasn't once or twice, it was dozens of instances where I heard people yelling at the cops, like, "We're on your side. Like, why aren't you with us?" Like, there was definitely this,
yes.
Like, "Hey, we're not your enemy, blah, blah, blah." Like, I heard that a lot.
I heard that a lot. I gotta be honest, I think those people were crazy. Like they just broke into the building. Like you can't like say that to the police.
These are just people.
Why are you being so mean to us?
I'm saying these are people out, like not inside. I'm saying these are people down away, like when the police were like establishing a perimeter. There was definitely, which was very chaotic because it's sort of like there's flashbangs going off, there's this confrontation, and then it's sort of like you're on our side. It was weird. Like hearing people have these conversations was very strange compared to what I saw during 2020, during that summer, which was like just total confrontation. This was more
BLM.
This was more like congenial almost in some ways.
I'm glad you brought this up. I do want to talk about this. Like I noted a lot of this. It's in the book. Is there these people who were like, they felt like the police betrayed them?
Yes.
Like I had people who were like filming the police. The crowd was filming the police because they were sure that once everybody saw this, they'd be mad at the police. And like I had an interview I did with a woman where it's just, it reaches a point of cognitive dissonance. Like you tell yourself a narrative enough times and it becomes very difficult to admit when evidence contradicts it. So like this woman was saying, "Oh, conservatives, we support the police. We're defensive. We don't attack. we're only act defensively. And then, so because we're being defensive, we broke the windows in and pushed the police down the hallways. And we're like, no, that's offense. That's not defense. You think of yourself as someone who wouldn't do that. You think of yourself as a friend of the police, but that's not what you did. You know?
Well, I think they're using a broad reference in an acute situation. In other words, they're defending their country, they're defending democracy, but at the time, they're attacking people who are just there to do their job.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, the idea of defending democracy, because like when I get to the conclusion of the book, when I say if there's any one thing I want people to remember, it would be that Trump said the election was stolen, and he offered no particular proof. And that's a big deal. He did not order people to go commit violence. The news media reported as if he did, and he didn't. And it's unfortunate they lied about that, because I think he did something bad that I wish was better understood. Like he said, 80,000 dead people voted in Michigan, 69,721 dead people voted in Illinois. Like for an hour, he went on like that, listing numbers as if he had official sounding facts that he'd proved the election was stolen, and he never proved that. But so the people in the crowd thought that was real, and that's a lot of that helps really understand why they did a lot of what they did. I'm not saying I'm defending it, but that is, if you want to understand, that's how you understand.
I think a lot of the people, especially the ones that went down there early, they were already like, they didn't even need to hear that. Like there was, and that's why I was asking if you had been down there in November, like during the Stop the Steal things, because for me personally, because I had gone to one of those two, and to me, the January 6th thing was just a continuation of that, of those two. And so people were already, they were already like, we're going to go down and make our voices heard, before there was any speech for Trump or any of that.
I strong agree that like this wasn't the first time that came up, the idea that they had specific numbers. Strong agree with that. But that's also because he'd been saying that for like a month or more. Like it's still the same thing. Like that's the thing he did. Like I think
if he hadn't have spoken that day, and he hadn't posted certain things, it probably would not have happened.
Yeah, it's impossible to know that kind of thing.
You don't know,
but I think he should not have done that. If that's not a crime, that surprises me. I would have thought it was like, I think I read later that it turns out it's because it's freedom of speech, First Amendment, it falls under that. But like to get up and say, I, the president of the United States, beloved by a large portion of the country, my followers, officially say this election was stolen from me, but I don't have any particular proof. That's bullshit, man. Like no one should do that.
Yeah. I mean,
may I interject, because I don't want to get too far from some of the statements that have been made. I often use the term, and sometimes Mike, I think he's leaning more towards my side on this, that there is no conspiracy, there's choreography. They know events are going to happen and they plan the dance around it. And it's like, for instance, you were talking about the 14-year veteran turning into a 14-year-old that was shot. It's like they plan the dance around it. They hear 14 years. Well, what's more sympathetic than a 14-year-old kid getting shot? Which, first of all, are we morons? What 14-year-old kid was going to be at that rally?
Oh man, there were old people, there were kids, there were people walking their dogs.
Yeah, but most likely they weren't going to bring their 14-year-old child into the middle of the mix.
No, I was saying when I was where I took this fucking picture, like when people were breaking into the Capitol building, there were old people, there were little kids, there were people walking their dogs. It was this weird parallel reality. Like
that's support that they were kind of idiots.
Yeah.
Well, no, it especially down at the Ellipse. Yeah, it was a cross section. I mean, there were a lot of Vietnamese people there. There were it was
that made it into the book.
It was America at the Ellipse, and then it definitely once at the Capitol things skewed younger and more guys. I mean, in my perspective, from what I remember, but in general, there were most of the people there, the vast majority that I saw. I mean, 99% plus were, wearing a Donald Trump hat, or had an American flag or just wearing like their coat. Like they didn't, there was whatever. And then there was like 1% there that were in the tack gear and they had like all the stuff going on and they didn't have any signs. I was like, what are those guys doing? And I even have pictures of some of them at the or outside the ellipse. And I was like, they seem kind of strange. Like, you know, they just didn't fit what everyone else
I'm going
looked
to
like.
disagree with
allow
your
me real
perspective.
quick. Well, this is what I saw. But
yeah. I'm not saying you didn't see it. I'm just saying I saw something different.
Yeah. What'd you see?
Well, he wanted to go ahead.
Oh.
So with the other one that for me, perspective is so huge. Like with my patients, I talk about it a lot. Where if you reframe it, you know, you got this mountain view, but there's a big old factory right next to the mountain. So what do? You turn it over here, and suddenly it's a beautiful mountain view again.
Right.
And when I think of January 6th, and I was not there, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but all the video you saw on the news was like right up in it. And I just always had this weird thought that if they would have panned out like, 600, 800 yards, suddenly the crowd was going to look a lot smaller and a lot less rioty. Is that a fair assessment? Was it?
That actually goes
wasn't
back
300,000 people right there at the Capitol. It was
they were like on the lawn, like you could like all the way up to the lawn and spilling into the streets were like huge numbers of people. And I think that also explains a lot of the otherwise strange behavior by the police, because there was like a bit of a gap, I guess. So like I could run up the stairs, run up the lawn to the Capitol building, and the people who were milling around outside the building but hadn't gone in. See, I was there too late to see the initial group go in, although I saw some people go in later. That was fairly sparse, but I could stand on the balcony and look out, and it was just like a sea of people. There was just millions. And there was a sense that, like, what are those people going to do? They're right there. Maybe they might go in, maybe not. And like there's videos of this, of the QAnon shaman and other people, when they're inside, they threatened the police by saying the other people were going to come in soon, or would if the police did something wrong. So like there's video, like the police were accused of being oddly lenient and like to the point of being on their side. And like there's one police officer who put on a MAGA hat and started giving tours, and he got fired, and I think that's fair. But like a lot of them, I do think they were in this very uncertain situation, because the people who broke in said, we're just the first ones. There's 4 million people out there, and they could be coming next. So you don't want to like lay your hands on me. You'll just make the mob mad. And like there's videos of that happening. And
this doesn't scream of an organized situation. This screams definite spontaneity.
That's going too far. Like I said, like I talked to a lot of people, and it's like there doesn't seem to have been a plan for what to do once they got inside the building. It was just step 1, break inside the building. Step 2, America is saved. But they did have it planned up to step 1. A lot of people showed up wearing body armor. I saw so many people, they had their flags mounted on like clubs. They were everywhere, the flag clubs. People showed up with helmets, they brought gas masks. They had some awareness that something might happen. I even spoke to at least 2 people. I spoke to at least 2 people before that they broke into the building, who mentioned we should break into the building. We should push our way into the building. There was some idea, most likely being discussed on internet forums, however vague or clear, that they were going to do something like that. I think it's absolutely important that I mention that as part of the record. That is, it'd be misleading to remove it.
Yeah, I mean,
when I say lack of organization, like that was an army. The amount of people there was an army. They could have done real damage if they had any kind of like real leadership in this. That's where I'm saying that there is far more of a spontaneity to it than there was an actual let's burn down the White House.
let me give you one of my analyses that I'm a little more certain on. I wouldn't bet my life on this, but just based on like the preponderance of evidence I put together, I'll go out on a limb on this one, a little more so than like the questions about instigators in the crowd. I get the feeling that there was a large number of people who thought they were going to show up and someone was going to tell them the plan. A lot of people thought maybe Trump would tell them what to do. A lot of people thought, like, you remember Q was very big at that time. Didn't hear anything about him since then. But this internet personality, conspiracy theorist Q that everyone was following.
Yeah, we're
maybe Q.
definitely familiar. Yeah.
Okay, there was some people I spoke to that they thought Trump was going to reveal that he was Q. Like that was going to be the big moment. So a lot of people were like, I'll just prepare for anything. And then whatever I'm told to do, I'll be ready. So I'll bring, maybe I've heard this plan about pushing our way into the Capitol. Maybe it'll be that, maybe it'll be something else. And then they got no instructions. So like then without any clear leader, they decided to go ahead and do something anyway. I think that's a good guess.
I can, it's funny you mention that Q guy because I really wish the movie V for Vendetta had never been made because there's so much of that vibe with all these groups. It's like you got this one figurehead, and it's not the process that they're going through. It's the thought. It's the inspiration. That's why we're doing it. And really, these are just a bunch of uninspired people that you could have said, go in there with a cube of Jello on your head, and they'd fucking done it. You know what I mean?
There was a guy who it broke my heart to cut this from the book. This was because it happened on January 5th. But I met him. He showed up in like a Boba Fett costume that was mixed together, but it was mixed together with multiple things that were like shitty actual armor, sort of. So he had like Captain America's shield, like a chest plate, Boba Fett armor, like a big club with a thing on it. And he was walking around saying, "Hey guys, do you know where the fight's gonna be?"
Wow.
And at first I thought like I often have this sensation when you go out looking for the most interesting people and then you find them. I'm like, is this real? Is this guy just fucking with me? But I think I talked to him for a long time. I recorded it and he says, yeah, at some other event, I forget what it was, like Antifa showed up and we got in a fight with them and it was the greatest experience of my life. I just want to come here and fight evil again like I did before. Do you know where I can go fight? Like people like that exist, and there were many of them.
Oh, dude, I know. I deal with 16 of them every 3 days out of the week. Yeah, they really exist, and man, they believe their fucking bullshit, man.
And you hit the nail on the head too, because like he said, like the rest of my life is meaningless. This is the only thing I ever did that gave me a rush, like a sensation of being alive. And for a lot of the people, I kind of think it is partially about that. It's just the feelings. It feels good to be part of like the heroic story standing up to evil. Like I did it when I was protesting the Iraq War, almost the exact same spot outside the Capitol building. I threw my body against police shields. I totally understand the urge to do that. I understand what they got out of it. But in their case, in my case, I had like actual trained activists, like people with clipboards and megaphones who had some idea what they were doing, telling people what to do and keeping them in line. And there was just no clear guidance for the mob whatsoever. In fact, I think that's one of the points is because remember, because they left without Trump spontaneously, there was no one leading the march. And because there was no one leading the march, nobody could tell them to stop. They had momentum on their own. Like in a real protest march, there's an organizer. There's several. There's people with megaphones and clipboards who got permits, who understand some idea of what the strategy is long term. Here, this was just a big blob of people walking across the city, really angry. And it all spun out of control.
There was no one with the megaphone being like, stop doing that.
Right. And you know what, like little side note, it was supposed to be Alex Jones. Like Alex Jones was supposed to lead the march, but because Trump spoke too long, the people left without him. And so they left. And Alex Jones did kind of like chase after them with a megaphone and tell them to stop, to his credit. But that's one view of like what went wrong. Like one of the many things that like had this not happened, it wouldn't have spun all out of control, I think. Like if there'd just been someone leading it.
But I think the fact that there wasn't someone leading it is kind of the point. I think it was a lot of again, getting back, and I mean, you were saying you disagreed. I'm not sure exactly what point, but there were people
I saw a lot
of
of
all ages,
weapons and armor, and people who had
well,
prepared in advance.
maybe if you
weapons.
were, yeah, I mean, that's just a matter of degree. But I'm just saying, there were a lot of people that looked like they just came from their kid's soccer game. I mean, that
Well,
was the
sure.
majority for me that I saw. I mean, but anyway.
Well, I mean, I would say that a lot of people like that, probably a majority, looked like they were there for a kid's soccer game. Even like, you know, but even if that's like 70%, like, you know, a 30% of the crowd who showed up with like homemade body armor and clubs, that
I don't think
speaks
it
to
was
some form.
30%.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
that's I'm just
It
throwing the
wasn't
numbers out, but
100,000
it was
people.
I and like you and I come from different perspectives, because whenever I go anywhere, I'm
Yeah.
looking for trouble. I'm
No,
trying
I
to
gotcha.
find the people who are going to cause trouble. But I saw a significant portion, whatever percent it was, of people who had clearly showed up with some idea.
But to be fair, you also saw them at the core where
Capitol.
they were attacking. So the concentration was going to be higher there. I'm sure if you panned out, you know, there weren't going to be.
It's a matter of degree. I mean,
I would agree with that.
It's a fine point. One question, Ben, just out of curiosity, have you had any concerns about being caught up in all this stuff, like from a legal
I wanted to ask that
standpoint, or have people been like, I saw that guy on video, or because I know there's people there that were press, there were people that were marked press, there were people that were unmarked press, but you know, I mean, they're getting to the point now in
they're charging
Congress where they're charging people that were on the lawn with trespassing, which you and I have both talked about being there. So, I mean, have you had any concern or questions, or
have you been contacted by anybody?
I am not famous enough to have attracted attention yet. That's kind of
well, that's all about
the
to change, because this
I-
is a friends of the
you don't worry, you don't have to worry about this show bringing it on to you.
We're just worried, or just concerned.
It's certainly something I've thought about.
Is it something that's like in a concern or in your head?
Oh, absolutely. Like we haven't talked about this much, but one of my like central themes of the Chasing History project as a whole is, as a history teacher, I studied civilizations as they were collapsing, and I kind of think I know the signs.
Yeah.
So I think we're collapsing. I think the forms are falling apart. So traditionally, under the First Amendment and the rights of journalism, I was absolutely within my rights to do what I did. But I do worry that the laws are getting weird. Like it's getting weird. Like they're not enforcing those First Amendment protections the way they used to.
Yeah.
So no, they're not.
Because they go against the narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Yeah.
So this is back to, I think it was before the show. You said something that I found interesting, because we like to liken ourselves to a bit of a Nostradamus effect. Like we talk about things on one show, and then
they happen.
They happen, or something similar that you can at least connect to what we were saying before. And you had said that you had watched our January 6th show, and that we were ahead of the game on some of the stuff. So I was just interested as to what you felt we like nailed with it, and where we were just completely off the wall bonkers.
Well, like the main thing I was focusing on was the Brian Snik stuff, I think, which you know, you managed to navigate pretty well. I didn't completely agree, but pretty well. The guy who was charged for pepper spraying Officer Snik. And like you had a back and forth, and people generally agreed that like, yeah, that's not, he didn't kill him, you know. And then you were like it doesn't make sense. That's not murder, and it's good that he wasn't charged with murder, but he still did something. Like
sure, that's fair.
And like a lot of people, like I said, a lot of people, they just want to push their own narrative. They believe that their allegiance to some team, the Democrats, the Republicans, which is crazy, because I think that they hate those people. Honestly, I think Democrats hate their voters, and Republicans maybe. But anyway, people feel allegiance to their team, and they'd be like, yeah, so those guys, they did nothing wrong. And you're like, well, they did something wrong. But on the other hand, you pointed out something that I hadn't even thought about, which was they only charged him with assaulting that one officer who died of a stroke the next day. Like they didn't
Not the
charge
16 other that got pepper
right,
sprayed in. Yeah.
right. So that shows unequal enforcement of the law, and that
Well,
I
it
thought was
shows-
an excellent point.
It shows a clear focus that they're trying to they're going to get rid of the minutia, the people that walked away,
Right.
went home, rubbed
And-
some milk in their eyes, and they were done. And they're going to focus on the guy that probably had a stroke because shit, I'm under a lot of stress.
Right.
Or maybe
Right.
it was there prior. We don't really know what kind of a stroke it was. and
That's
just-
right.
That's
yeah,
fair.
he had a
Well-
stroke the next day. That's all we can say for sure.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask if you had any view or info on the pipe bombs.
Yeah,
Oh, I was gonna.
well, you know, okay,
yeah,
let me,
Mike,
I wanted
let
to
me-
ask
let me
that
mention
too.
that a little
You
bit.
are a fucking steal the thunder motherfucker tonight.
Before we move on, I want to mention that the day after, actually, I think this story covers both things. No, those are just two similar stories, different days. I saw his funeral train, and like, so me and another guy who I was kind of working together with, he was a photojournalist, and we just kind of met on the road, and we were doing the same thing. Like, both of us were just driving around, going to MAGA rallies because we had the sense that there was something worth documenting. He was a very interesting guy. And so we were kind of like what you said earlier, like, you know, we didn't run away from January 6th. We ran towards it to try and cover it for journalistic purposes. And we were worried we'd get in trouble. And there was like I got a text from him, like we were at like a park, like at a monument. And he said, like, get out of there now. There are police everywhere. And like the police, like they're just like like in force, like a huge amount. Seemed very like like it seemed like for a minute, like, holy shit, I don't know what's going on here, but I don't want to be here. This seems like some kind of a sting or something, a show of force. And it turned out to be Brian Sicknick's funeral parade. But they it was also a show of force. Like, that's a very common historical thing. Like, to have a funeral, like this was what happened in like the goddamn Boston Massacre, like before the American Revolution. You know, like, so if somebody like said, can you 100% prove that this is a show of force? Like, no, I can't, but this is my interpretation. It was a very ominous showing of police. So as soon as Brian Sicknick died, it seemed to me that there was some element of seizing on that as part of like a public
Choreography.
thing. And I definitely, I saw that from the beginning, from that moment. It took me a while to figure out it was all the same guy. So your question about the pipe bombs. Also, when I was hanging around DC the month afterwards, here's maybe related, maybe not. The DC the month after that, between that and Biden being sworn in, that was fucking nuts, man. Like, that's the whole book just in that. I might publish it too. I have like several chapters written. It's amazing how much easier it is to write the first draft than it is to get it published. That's always been my problem. But like, it was like fucking occupied. It was a police state. It was military. There were like giant trucks everywhere crossing all the streets. There was, you know, military guys, like, you know, they were National Guard, but they looked full military.
They shut it down.
Just with with guns
No,
everywhere. And you know what was amazing is everyone in the city who like a week before had been protesting against the police loved them. I saw like a guy on a bike, like, get off his bike and stop and salute like the police officers you went past, like just some like teenage kid, you know, like this is the same city that had 2 riots that same year that were like basically anti-police riots against police brutality. People always mince my words and say I'm not getting it right, but you get my idea. Suddenly everyone loved the police. Suddenly everyone was glad that the police had taken over and were in charge of everything. And so like I was in an area, like in a park, where there was it was evacuated because there was another bomb threat. There was like a cooler chest, or I remember it was a red cooler chest next to a fountain, and nobody knew who owned it.
Igloo bomb.
Yeah. So the police showed up and everyone was investigated. So there was a sense that there was some sort of palpable danger there, that we were aware, that we were told that there had been bombs. People believed that bombs could go off, and that didn't go away until after Biden was sworn in. Like it was, I had a bet with my buddy who he was a Iraq War vet too. So he said he like knew, like he could read, danger, and he thought a bomb was going to go off somewhere in the city before the end of the day. And I said, I don't think that, because look how locked down it is. Like, if they were going to make a move, they would have done it on January 6th. They missed their chance if that's what they were going for.
Well, that's we did an episode. One of my favorite episodes that we've done in a while was on the pipe bombs, because we kind of, I think, Mike or Des, if you disagree, or I'm going to speak for us. If you don't agree, then by all means. But we kind of felt like bomb A and bomb B were probably planted by the same side, and it was the plan B situation. If shit doesn't go down, we can do this and we can make it go down.
What do you mean the same side? Which side is that?
Same source, I should say.
The same person.
Yeah.
I think it was
And
definitely
that-
the
and that
same.
Is this planted by somebody who supported Trump or by somebody who
That's the
supported Biden?
thing. It could have, again, I'm speaking for all of us, but we kind of felt like it could be on either side of the aisle. And if things didn't go as they had planned, then they could do this to kind of spike it. I think it would have all ended up painting the right very poorly, but I don't want to say whether it was Democrats, maybe it was anarchists, but there was a peculiarity to the whole bomb situation in that they were not apparently active, like they wouldn't have blown up. They didn't like.
I mean, if we had a adequate and interested national security apparatus, we would be able to figure it out. Like, to me, again, this is like what I'm talking about with like overarching story. I mean, the pipe bomb story is fascinating, but to me, the overarching story is, how the hell do we not know who this? Why isn't this name published everywhere? I mean, it's funny. We cannot find out who left the cocaine in the White House. We can't find out who left the
We
pipe
know
bombs.
who left the cocaine in the White House.
Yeah,
Not
the same
official.
guy that can't
how many
seem to
things
get
we
his
officially don't
laptop
know.
to be revealed.
Yeah, but it's
Just like we officially don't know what killed, Epstein. Like,
yeah,
everybody
we don't know what
knows,
happened to Epstein.
but the
there's
people who
certain
decide the
things-
official
himself.
story, they won't admit it.
But there's certain things that we're able to discern within like 27 seconds, and we know them for sure. Like, something happens, like, well, we know this isn't terrorism. Like 10 minutes later, I'm like, okay, that's nice to know. But it goes back to like what we started with, like with the media, but also with our national security apparatus. The second that rational people are justified in not trusting what they're being told, that's when the wheels come off. That's when civil society starts going.
Yeah,
Because
like
no one can even agree on what the truth is anymore. I mean, that's a disaster.
You know what's scary about that? I'm kind of drifting into another mode now. I'm going more philosophical speculation as opposed to accurate recording. But like, you can make it work if people don't trust what they're being told and have your society not collapse, just not if you're a democracy. Like, dictatorships can make that shit work.
Good point.
But like, once if you have a system where people aren't able to get trustworthy information, it's very hard for that system to remain free.
Yeah. Yep.
I first of all, I love, as I said before we were on the show, I was like, I wasn't really in tune with where you lean politically, but you're actually kind of inspirational in what you were saying, because I feel like out of all this mess that's going on, I feel like there's more hybrids of Democrats and Republicans out there. There's more of a group that are going to become more pragmatic, because we just can't fucking trust anything. So now we're going to use our eyes more than our ears, and really pay attention to what's going on, read between the lines, all that.
Well, but a lot of it is, I'm just to jump in. I mean, the thing is with Ben is, though, he's an independent guy, journalist, whatever. I don't mean to
call him a journalist,
cast aspersions on you, just call you a journalist. But my point is, he's an independent guy, and personally, I learned more about what happened that day, and I was there from listening to the recordings he had than I have from any of the alphabet media. Because
there's something to be said for objectivity.
there,
Definitely.
yeah,
On the
it's
one
like,
hand, you're kind. On the other hand, saying I'm better than the alphabet media isn't saying very much. That's
well,
not a very good
no, as I said,
Yeah,
I don't
I'm
like to
better than the
cast
alphabet
aspersions
media, and I
on
can't
you.
even
but I
spell.
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good
But
for
to
you.
me, but as and again, I'm not trying to be nice, but that's horrible, Ben. Like, I mean, if I'm saying
Right.
nothing
Well,
against you, but if that's true, right? That's horrible.
All right. Let me see if I can talk you through some of the things that I went through for the last few years. Like
Yeah.
it's things are horrible right now. They're so much worse than you're told. You know, you're surrounded by these narratives just telling you to be calm. And when you gradually like peek your eyes open and see how horrible it is, you're tempted to just close your eyes and go back, you know? And then if you can't, often you're tempted to just give up. I mean, so many people get lost there. They're
That's
like,
where
"Ah,
I've been
fuck.
going.
What can I do?" You know, but like first, you just start by focusing your attention down to what you can actually touch with your hands. You know, like take care of yourself, take care of the people around you, you know, stockpile some food, build up a way to take care of yourself. And
Right.
then after you've done everything you can, maybe create some records so that even I plan to go down with the ship. This is what I'm doing is my own way to try to save America because I do love America. I do care about it, especially once you learn our history and you start to learn the histories of some other countries and you realize we really are special. Like we're not perfect, but it's amazing. So, but like I'm going to go down fighting. I'm going to try to turn things around, but I accept the fact that I may not. Like we may have passed the point of no return.
Mm-hmm.
And so I then just try to leave something that'll be useful to the future generations. I'll leave a record of what we did. And, you know, you don't have to go write a book and get in the Capitol building and get stormed to do that. You can just find anything you know that is useful and write it down and capture it and pass it on to the people who come after you. And then maybe there's a chance things will get better over time because we pass the torch one generation at a time.
It's amazingly optimistic, Ben, and I appreciate that. I
Yeah.
really do. I do. I'm in all
I look at my
honesty,
children whom
I need to hear
love.
that.
I look at my children whom I love, and I would dive in front of a bus to save their lives in a heartbeat. But they're also entitled little pricks at times.
Yeah.
And I worry about these like middle of the road generation that is going to be old enough to have an effect later, but not go beyond where our children will be leading. So they'll still have this negative effect in that middle area. And I don't think any of our kids are prepared for what's going to come in the next couple decades. I'm terrified.
Dude, I don't think we're prepared.
Right,
Like,
but
I have
we have
been-
like a mental framework, like an ability to learn, like critical thinking, like can figure
We
out the
used
answer to
to.
some things without being told. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, I see, you know, a lot of people who are, you know, like 20 years younger than me, who I describe them like they when the lockdown hit, they all spent all their time on social media
Or
Let me
playing
see if I-
video games, yeah.
Let me see if I can find this one. But
Oh, he's reading the book
okay.
again.
Here it is. Here it is. Do you mind? All right, so this is early. So
Haven't you read this already?
I like it. I reread it. Okay. A year before the crowd from Trump's speech swarmed the Capitol building, my civilization was dealt a crippling blow by the COVID-19 pandemic, aka coronavirus. From March to May 2020, state governments ordered lockdowns to fight the spread of the disease. Suddenly, it seemed every school, small business, and public space in America was closed. Without a functioning economy, unemployment and poverty skyrocketed. Within 3 months, both were growing at the fastest rates since the Great Depression, sources noted. I remember passing rows of rotting storefronts, every inch of their abandoned sidewalks overflowing with dirt-smeared homeless tents. Everything solid was falling apart. Even those of us who didn't get sick got sucked into poverty or were prisoners in our own home during the lockdown. There were no bars, no movie theaters, no sports, no concert, no public entertainment of any kind. If we left the house to buy food, we had to wear medical masks. No one had a face anymore. No one could smile at you. We were a giant, soulless blob with 1,000 vacant eyes. Our entire population was cut off from everything that gave us joy, and everyone around me succumbed to insanity. They spent all their time bragging about arguments they'd won on the internet with people they had never met.
You know, dude, your writing reads like gumshoe history. It's like the Maltese Falcon meets history. Like, I really love the way you write. Yeah, it's like, it's just, I don't know where we're going. I'm so worried for the future.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm worried too. But like, the best I've been able to come up with is like, save yourself first, and then save someone you actually know. And like, if you finish that, work out from there.
When the plane's getting ready to crash, they tell you to take the mask and cover you or your microcosm, and then move on, and hopefully you can do something later, but make sure you live so you can help others.
Because like, I
dead.
Like, my grandfather, like someone I knew, you know, when I was a little kid, he was an old man. Like, he had to go out every day and just scrounge for food so they wouldn't die. You know, that was the Great Depression. That happens.
Yeah,
that is a possibility that civilizations face. And I would not be surprised if in the course of our lives, it gets that bad for a lot of people. You know, so like, you kind of got to become scrappy, like figure out the really useful skills that you can save yourself if we get another Great Depression type situation. Well, where there's honestly any number of horrible things that could happen.
Well, that's
like, any one of them aren't that likely, but there's a lot of them.
That's why Mike and I are moving to Costa Rica.
Well, no,
Hey, I'm moving to Costa Rica.
But that's why we're podcasting, because we figured, you know, if everything hit the fan, at least podcasters, we could still. Yeah, people would be interested in what we're talking.
I do think that podcast is the new way of getting some free thought, and they haven't managed us yet, like they're trying to do in Canada, where they're like, you have to get a license to podcast.
Yes.
That's a scary concept in its own right.
It is like the founding fathers of the United States got so much right. And, you know, they didn't really think of these ideas themselves. It was 100 years of the Enlightenment philosophers, your John Locke and Montesquieu and whatever came up with these. But the American founding fathers put it into law. And they understood that, like, freedom doesn't work without free speech. Like, you can't let the government be regulating speech, telling people what they can't say. Like, there's limits on everything. Everyone knows you can't shout fire in a crowded room. Fine. But that's a principle to make a democracy work, is people have to have freedom of speech. And Canada's not looking like they're going to make it. Because that causes, that's a domino. Like, you take away that, you take away other things. It spreads quickly.
Oh, yeah.
So Ben, I want to continue this, but for us, it's like 11 o'clock at night. We got to head out here. I want to have you on again very soon. This has been a really great episode. I love your perspective. I feel like we didn't even tap into everything that you could have told us about it. That's one of the reasons why I'd like to do another one. But we have lots of subjects that I think you will, you know, there's a melding there. Again, like I said, I like this hybrid, this hybrid politicism that I'm feeling like might be coming, and it may be the hope that we want, is where we can have some polite discourse, but I think we're pretty far from it. So we'll see what happens.
I would say that, in my opinion, if we're going to save America, the most likely scenario, that's the good scenario, is ending the two-party system. At least getting more options than that. If we could do that, maybe we could turn things around. So maybe that's our best case scenario.
I think I don't disagree. Well, so anyway, we have a little thing that we say at the end of the show. I think we've been on long enough. I think it's about time we wrap it up.
Before we go, do you mind if I officially plug my products?
Oh,
Like,
absolutely.
Plug them.
I'm trying to make a living doing this. and
Plug the
very
hell
hopeful
out of that
people will
shit.
Plug it,
buy 'em.
man.
But yeah, so everything I do is the brand of the Chasing History Project.
Okay.
So website, chasinghistoryproject.com. Go there and sign up for the email list. That's the main thing I use right now. The podcast, Chasing History Podcast, that's on Substack and I believe Spotify. I'm on a couple of social media platforms. I forget which one. I have an assistant that handles that. We don't do much
know,
yet. But
the
the
social
point
needs.
is,
You have an
if I can
assistant?
you have no idea how much blood and sweat it takes getting at that level. But yes,
Yes.
I'm trying to be a real business. Like I'm doing this because it's supposed to eventually pay the bills.
Teach us, oh guru.
Kudos.
Right. But anyway, so the point is, if I can prove I have followers, then I get taken more seriously by the various people who decide if authors get money. So if you follow whatever, my social media, my email list, and buy the book, it's on Amazon. Sorry, guys, we stormed the Capitol. That would help me do my job better.
And I think the way you did that, we might even be able to cut it into the front.
Awesome.
How you entered it, so maybe
Oh
we
yeah.
can
Well,
make that
I
part
think I've probably should leave it at the back. I think I've heard that's
Okay.
a better spot.
even better.
Okay.
Yeah.
That just saved
So-
Mike a ton of time.
Yeah, so say it again. I think we've been on long enough. I think it's time to
Sounds good.
wrap it up.
Sounds
Yeah.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's excellent.
From the 80s, it's technically a sequel. Like they barely mention it, but it's
I think I heard that,
there's
yeah.
a couple of shots like from that showing like pictures, like say.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no doubt.
And then
no doubt.
didn't they remake it in the alts or the?
No, that was a prequel. That was a prequel to the. Yeah, that was like it. Remember the? Well, that's another episode, Mike.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, look. Here's the thing about the thing. When I watched it when I was like 5, like,
You gotta say this
HBO, no, I'm just saying it scares the shit out of me.
It's
and now I'm
scary.
like 50, and it scares the shit out of me now.
Yeah.
Like that movie is just.
It's one of the most legit scary movies ever. And it was
Yeah,
like
it's the
one of
number-
the last great movies
the number
before like
3.
this digital special effects came out, so it's like it's all practical.
Yeah.
But like you don't need to see much. Because like
No.
the premise is that there's like an alien that landed